Hey guys, this is the first, I guess, real episode of the engine tune-up series that we're starting. And I know I said we were going to do a visual check very first, but it is freezing cold in here, and this is going to involve us crawling underneath the car and looking for any fluid leaks, and if there are any, we're going to want to clean all that up. And I really don't want to do that in like below freezing weather, so we're gonna skip this. We'll come back to this, but today we're just gonna open up the valve cover and retorque some bolts. So we're gonna start working on the car and remove this valve cover, because the bolts that we want to make sure that are still torqued to spec are the head bolts that are inside here, and also the manifold bolts. And we'll cover that in a second. But before we take the car apart, make sure your batteries are disconnected. And we'll start by pulling the spark plug wires and this vacuum tube. We'll just set aside the spark plugs right out here. And we'll remove this vacuum hose. There's a little flame arrestor in here. I think a lot of people have lost this, but we're just gonna keep it in there. So the valve cover should come off with just those disconnections. And we're gonna use an impact driver to remove these 10mm valve cover bolts. And you don't have to remove them in any particular order. Like I always say, never use a power tool to fasten bolts, but it's okay to use them for disassembly. And I know this valve cover is really ugly, so whenever we get a chance, we'll just replace it with a newly painted one. Some people have suggested that I get it painted the Datsun blue, so I might do that. And I don't know if I'm gonna reuse this gasket. You probably can, but I have another one. So, you know what, we'll just keep this. All right, we're gonna wipe off the engine oil from the edges so that doesn't drip. If you guys have been following my 280Z build series, you guys know that this is a rebuilt cylinder head that we installed in here with ARP head bolts. And of course, when we installed it, we did lash the valves and we did torque all the head bolts to spec. But what you're supposed to do is, after some time of maybe 100 miles of driving around, and after a few on and off cycles, you're supposed to reopen the valve cover and retorque the head bolts. So I bought a torque wrench. The brand is Tecton from Amazon. This is a 3/8 drive torque wrench because I was tired of fumbling with the 1/2-inch drive that I had in the build series. And the torque rating that we're looking for is 60. I've read anywhere from 50 to 60, but I'm gonna keep it at 60 because that's what I set it at last time. So you want a torque wrench that is rated for at least that. For ARP stud users, we're gonna use a 12mm deep socket. So whenever you're dealing with head bolts, sequence is very, very important, even when you're just retorquing the bolts. So the sequence is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. You want to work inside out. I don't know if it matters if you go right first and then left, but you definitely want to do it in sequence. Looks like it's still pretty tight. I feel it twisting just, I don't know, maybe 10 degrees, but I mean, these torque wrenches are not that accurate, so it doesn't necessarily indicate a problem. It's recommended that you go for 2 clicks each time you tighten, just to make sure, I guess. Yeah, none of these are moving very much, which is good. Alright, so this isn't actually torquing the bolts. I don't know if there's any specific torque readings that these are supposed to be tightened to, but these oil spray bolts also have a tendency to come loose, so it never hurts to just check that they're still tight, at least every time you open up the valve cover. And those are 10 millimeter. So at this point, you guys might be wondering, what about the cam tower bolts? Don't we have to retorque that as well? Well, that I am not sure. I'm kind of afraid to touch them because I don't know if you do have to do them, if you have to do them in a particular sequence. I certainly don't want to touch them and risk getting the clearances between the bearing and the camshaft all messed up. So I'm gonna leave that alone, but if anybody has a definite idea about the cam tower bolts and if any retorquing is necessary, do please let me know in the comment section. So now that we covered all the bolts in here, we're going to move on to the manifold bolts. And by manifold, I mean the 4 intake manifold bolts right here. And those are supposed to be torqued to, I believe, anywhere from 25 to 36. So we're gonna hit the middle and go for 30. And these big ones up here are, let's see, 14 millimeters. I don't actually recall what we set these to at assembly, but so a little bit of a turn there, and frick. The various manifold bolts are just horrible to deal with because they are so inaccessible. And having to tighten these was definitely my least favorite part of the build. Two clicks each time. All right, now we're gonna do the exhaust manifold bolts. And I think the torque rating is supposed to be anywhere from 10 to 13 foot-pounds. And like I said, it's not a great idea to use U-joints and extensions like this. I'm using both for precisely torquing bolts down, but I don't think this really needs to be that precise, and there's no other way to reach these. They look like they're still on tight, so hopefully we did it right the first time and they haven't loosened up all that much. So I'm hoping it's okay to skip a few that I can't reach. Yeah, they're not turning at all. Did I mention that this is my least favorite thing to do? I'm gonna use this crab net. Caught myself a socket. Even if you can't reach all of them, I do suggest that you check the ones at the end, because the places that are the most prone to exhaust leaks are cylinders 1 and 6. It's towards the ends here, and luckily those are the most reachable bolts. So at the very least, make sure that the bolts towards the ends are nice and tight. And by the way, a lot of people don't notice, but when you're done with your torque wrench, just release all the tension and then store it. Apparently, if you store it with the torque setting on high, it does mess with the calibrations. So there's a little tech tip for you. So those are all the bolts that we absolutely needed to check, but of course there's a ton of other bolts in a lot of different places, like these thermostat bolts right here. And while it's not critical for you to check every single bolt, no one's going to do that. But if there's any areas that you're concerned about, please do go ahead and check and retighten those bolts every once in a while. It'll just prevent leaks and headaches in the future.